Ellie, innocent and pure at just 18 years old, was locked in a basement, but the millionaire's son finds her and falls in love with her. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. Silence had a color in the basement walls. It was a dense brown, almost tangible, that dripped from the ancient beams and mixed with the smell of damp earth. Ellie knew every nuance of that silence, every subtle variation that marked the passage of hours. 18 years of confinement had taught her the language of emptiness. Her long, pale fingers slid along the rough wall as she counted, not the days, which she had lost track of long ago, but the breaths. That's how she measured time now. Inhale, exhale, life. On the floor above, unfamiliar footsteps echoed through the low ceiling. New, different from those she had memorized over the years. They weren't the shuffling steps of Mrs. Carson, the housekeeper who kept her there, nor the heavy walking of the occasional staff who circulated through the Blackwood mansion without ever suspecting her existence. These were determined, rhythmic steps, as if they belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going. Ellie huddled in her usual corner, between dusty boxes and furniture covered with yellowed sheets. That was her refuge, her improvised nest where she kept the few belongings she possessed. A broken comb, some stolen candles, a notebook made of pages torn from old books. In it, she wrote imaginary stories about the world outside, about the people she saw through the only crack of light that infiltrated through the ceiling on very bright days. The footsteps stopped. Ellie held her breath. The familiar creaking of the built-in bookcase that concealed the door to her prison made her heart race. In 18 years, that door had only opened 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and never at this hour. Never with that different sound of a key turning in the lock. The darkness was cut by a beam of light that momentarily blinded her. When her eyes adjusted, she saw a male silhouette outlined against the brightness. Tall, elegant, with broad shoulders and a posture that emanated authority. The man held a cell phone that he used as a flashlight, and the bluish glow of the screen partially illuminated his face. Striking features, defined jawline, dark eyes that studied her with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, controlled, but Ellie detected the subtle tremor of surprise. She didn't answer. Words were rare luxuries in her underground world. She preferred to observe, to try to understand what this apparition meant in her carefully constructed routine of solitude. The man took a step forward, and the light revealed more details: a well-cut suit, Italian shoes, a watch that discreetly shone on his wrist. "My name is Ethan Blackwood. This house—" He hesitated, as if the following words weighed on his tongue. "This house belonged to my father." Belonged. Past tense. Ellie felt something change in the air, a subtle alteration in the atmosphere she had breathed for so long. Death. That's what that word meant. Old Mr. Blackwood, whose footsteps she recognized on stormy days when he came down to the basement to check the generator, was dead. "You shouldn't be here." Ellie surprised herself with the sound of her own voice, hoarse from disuse. "No one should find me." Ethan took another step toward her, and this time the light revealed more of the environment. The damp walls, the few dust-covered pieces of furniture, the thin mattress on the floor that served as a bed. His eyes registered every detail with a mixture of disbelief and something more, guilt perhaps, as if each object in that basement was a silent accusation. "How long?" he asked, his voice now softer, as if he feared the answer. 18 years. The words came out like stones from her throat. "As long as I can remember." The cell phone trembled in Ethan's hand. For a moment, Ellie thought he might drop it. Instead, he put it in his pocket and turned on the basement light, a switch that Ellie knew existed, but was rarely used. The sudden brightness made her blink several times, and for the first time, she could clearly see the man who had discovered her secret. Ethan Blackwood was younger than his voice suggested, probably in his 30s. His face had a severe beauty like a classical sculpture, but it was his eyes that captured Ellie's attention. There was something in them that she recognized instantly. Loneliness. A loneliness different from hers, perhaps more sophisticated, masked by privilege and power, but equally deep. "You need to come with me." He extended his hand toward her, a gesture that seemed simultaneously an invitation and an order. "It's not safe here." Ellie didn't move. "Mrs. Carson." "The housekeeper?" Ethan frowned. "She's in the hospital. She had a stroke last night. That's why I came to check the house personally." The information hit Ellie like a wave. Mrs. Carson, her jailer and only connection to the outside world, was out of the picture. The woman who fed her, who sometimes brought her old books, who muttered prayers while changing her sheets, the woman who kept her prisoner was now herself confined to a hospital bed. "Why don't you call the police?" Ellie asked, studying Ethan's expression. "Isn't that what normal people would do when finding someone like this?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Nothing about this situation is normal, and something tells me the police would only complicate things." He looked around as if searching for cameras or listening devices. "My father kept many secrets. You, apparently, were one of them. I need to understand why before involving the authorities." Ellie considered her options. Staying meant continuing in this underground limbo, now without even the irregular presence of Mrs. Carson. Going with him meant diving into the unknown, trusting a stranger who carried the same last name that haunted her nightmares. Slowly she stood up. Her legs trembled slightly, not from fear but from possibility. For the first time in her life she had a real choice before her. She could feel the weight of that decision in every fiber of her being. "If I go with you," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I need to know one thing. Why do you care?" Ethan stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Because when I was 10 years old, I was also locked in a dark room for 3 days. An accident," they said afterward, "but I never forgot what it feels like to think the world has ended." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "The difference is that for me it was only 3 days. For you it was 18 years. Ellie took a step toward him, then another. Each movement was a small revolution, a declaration of independence against the walls that had contained her for so long. When she finally reached Ethan's outstretched hand, she felt something electrify her skin. Not just the touch of another human being, but the promise of what that touch represented: freedom. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Up," Ethan replied, his fingers gently closing around hers, "to the light." As they climbed the stairs, Ellie felt the air change. It became lighter, richer in possibilities with each step. Her heart beat a new unknown rhythm. It was the sound of the future opening before her, a future that, until a few hours ago, was nothing more than a feverish dream in her notebook of imagined stories. But as she emerged from the shadows, guided by a man who carried his own ghosts, Ellie couldn't imagine that her liberation was just the first act of a much larger story. A story of secrets buried for generations, of forbidden loves and silent betrayals. A story that began, ironically, with her exit from that basement, but whose roots extended much deeper than she could ever suspect. The afternoon sun streamed through the hallway windows when they reached the ground floor. Ellie closed her eyes, feeling the warmth on her face for the first time in years. When she reopened them, she saw her distorted reflection in the glass. A thin girl, pale as a ghost, with long, disheveled hair that seemed to have absorbed all the darkness of the basement. Beside her, Ethan observed her with an indecipherable expression. On his austere face, something had changed. It was as if, by liberating her, he had also freed something within himself, something that, like Ellie, had remained locked away for too long. "Welcome to the world," he said softly, and in those 3 words there was both a promise and a warning. Because the world, Ellie would soon discover, was much more complex than all the stories she had written in her notebook in the basement. And Ethan Blackwood, her unlikely savior, would be both her guide and her greatest enigma in this new reality that was unfolding before her. The room on the 2nd floor of the mansion was larger than the entire basement where Ellie had spent her life. Through the tall windows she could see the backyard, a green labyrinth dotted with flowers that danced with the afternoon breeze. Her eyes devoured every detail, The silk curtains that filtered the sunlight, the wallpaper with golden patterns, the king-size bed with sheets that looked like clouds. Ethan watched her from the doorway, his gaze attentive to her every reaction. In the last few hours, he had provided clean clothes, soft towels, and a tray with fresh fruit. Everything done with a silent efficiency that suggested years of practice in resolving complex situations. "This was my father's guest room," he explained, his voice controlled as always. "No one but me has access to this wing of the house. You'll be safe here while you decide what to do with me," Ellie completed, turning to face him. In the oval mirror near the dressing table, she still looked like an apparition. Her freshly washed hair fell like a dark curtain over the white cotton nightgown he had provided. A half smile appeared on Ethan's face, almost imperceptible. "While we discover the truth," he took a step into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "You must have questions." Ellie walked to the window, her fingers touching the glass, as if wanting to confirm it was real. "Thousands, but I don't know where to start." "Start with your name." Ethan approached, stopping at her side. In the reflection of the window, their silhouettes overlapped like in an old photograph. "Your full name?" "Ellie." She hesitated. "Just Ellie. Mrs. Carson never gave me a last name." Ethan frowned. "And your birth certificate?" "I've never seen any documents of mine." Ellie turned to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him step back. "For all intents and purposes, I don't exist." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with implications. Ethan ran his hand through his dark hair, a gesture that betrayed his apparent calm. "I'll need time to investigate this discreetly. People who might have worked here 18 years ago, old records." "Why are you doing this?" Ellie interrupted. "Why don't you hand me over to the authorities and simply go on with your life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan walked to the window, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "Because 18 years ago, when you were locked in that basement, I was being freed from my own captivity. 3 days that changed my life. And now finding you, it's as if fate is giving me a chance to correct something." Ellie observed him with curiosity. "You don't seem like the type of man who believes in fate." "I don't believe in fate." He turned to face her. "I believe in debts, in responsibilities, and in secrets that need to come to light." A distant thunder made Ellie startle. Dark clouds were beginning to form on the horizon, promising one of Chicago's typical summer storms. The air became denser, charged with electricity. "Are you afraid?" "Of storms?" Ethan asked, noticing her tension. "Not of the storms themselves," Ellie hugged herself. "In the basement, when it rained hard, water sometimes infiltrated through the walls. The smell of mold became unbearable, and the thunder echoed differently down there, as if they were amplified." Something passed through Ethan's eyes. Compassion, perhaps, or guilt. "Nothing will happen to you here. This room is safe. The entire house is." "The house where I was kept prisoner for 18 years? She let out a bitter laugh. "Forgive me if I don't feel exactly comfortable with that guarantee." "You're right." Ethan approached her, his steps silent on the carpet. "I can't undo what happened, but I can help you discover why, and who was responsible. And if the truth is worse than the prison, then we'll face that too." He extended his hand, offering a small metal object. A key. "This is the key to your room. Lock the door when you want. Open it when you feel safe. The choice is now yours." Ellie took the key, feeling the cold metal against her palm. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. For the first time in her life, she had control over a door. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked. Ethan nodded slightly. "I'll let you rest. Tomorrow we can start our investigation, if you're ready." As he headed for the door, Ellie called his name. "Ethan?" He stopped, turning to her. "If we discover that your father was involved, what will you do?" For a moment, Ethan's mask of control faltered. "The truth is the truth, Ellie. No matter how much it hurts." After he left, Ellie stood for a long time before the window, watching the approaching storm. The first drops of rain began to hit the glass, creating patterns that resembled tears. In her hands, the key was still warm from Ethan's touch. Slowly, she walked to the door and turned the key in the lock. The soft click of the mechanism sounded like music to her ears. She was no longer a prisoner, at least not in that physical and cruel form she had known for so long. But as she lay down on the soft bed, feeling the scent of clean sheets, Ellie couldn't help thinking that perhaps she was exchanging one prison for another, the prison of secrets that were beginning to reveal themselves. Outside, the storm, finally, arrived in all its force. But for the first time, the thunder didn't frighten her. They sounded like a prelude, the announcement that her true story was just beginning. Victor Blackwood's private library occupied the entire east wing of the E mansion's third floor. It was a labyrinth of mahogany shelves that rose from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes and documents yellowed by time. The smell of old paper and waxed wood filled the air, mingling with the golden light that entered through the skylights. Ellie ran her fingers along the spines of the books, amazed. In her captivity, books were rare treasures, always used and incomplete. Here there was more knowledge than she could absorb in several lifetimes. "My father kept all the family and company records here," Ethan explained, walking to a specific section where several chronologically organized folders were aligned on the shelves. Contracts, certificates, personal documents, everything is catalogued by date. "Where do we start?" Ellie asked, watching him select some folders. 18 years ago, Ethan placed the folders on a solid oak table near the window. "We need to find any record of births, hirings, or suspicious financial movements from that period." Ellie sat in one of the leather armchairs, while Ethan occupied the opposite chair. Between them, piles of documents began to form as they examined each folder. The silence was broken only by the whisper of pages being turned and the occasional sigh of frustration. After 2 hours of meticulous searching, Ellie found something. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Look at this." It was an old photograph, partially faded. It showed a young and beautiful woman with long dark hair like Ellie's, wearing a stunning set of jewelry, an emerald necklace and matching earrings. The date on the back indicated 18 years ago. "That jewelry," Ethan frowned, taking the photo to examine it more closely. "Those are the Blackwood family jewels. My mother used to wear them at important events, until they mysteriously disappeared." He stopped, his eyes widening slightly. 18 years ago. Ellie felt her heart accelerate. "Who is she?" Ethan turned the photo, revealing a handwritten inscription on the back. "Hannah Winterball." His expression changed subtly, as if a piece of the puzzle had fit into place. "Hannah. My father mentioned that name once, when he was drunk. It was right after my mother died. He said something about fixing a mistake with Hannah." Ellie took the photo again, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar in those features, something she saw every morning in the mirror of her new room. "Do you think she could be your mother?" Ethan completed, his intense gaze fixed on her. "The timing coincides, and the resemblance is undeniable." A distant thunder made the windows shudder. The rain falling outside created dancing shadows on the bookshelves, as if the books themselves were alive, breathing long-kept secrets. "But why was she wearing the family jewels?" Ellie asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "And why did they disappear at the same time?" Ethan abruptly stood up, walking to one of the more remote shelves. His fingers slid over several folders until he found what he was looking for. "My father's personal financial records, same period." He returned to the table, opening the folder with urgency. Here, a substantial transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands, followed by a series of monthly payments to an E. Carson. E. Carson? Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine. Elizabeth Carson, the housekeeper. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture that Ellie had already noticed was a sign of agitation. She wasn't just an employee, she was a guardian, paid to keep a secret. Ellie stood up, unable to contain the energy coursing through her body. She walked to the window, watching the rain that was now falling at full force. But what secret? Why keep me prisoner? Why not simply kill me? Ethan approached her from behind, so close that Ellie could feel the heat emanating from his body. Because you were valuable alive, a guarantee perhaps, or a form of control over someone. Ellie turned to face him, their bodies now separated by inches. The proximity made her heart skip a beat. Over Hannah? Or over my father? Ethan's voice was lower, hoarser. Ellie, what if you weren't kept prisoner just for being Hannah's daughter? What do you mean? What if you are... He hesitated, his dark eyes fixed on hers. What if you're also my father's daughter? The world seemed to stop for a moment. Ellie felt the floor waver beneath her feet and instinctively leaned on the windowsill for support. Ethan took a step toward her as if to steady her, but she raised a hand, maintaining distance. No, she whispered. That would be... It would explain everything, Ethan completed, his voice tense. The money, the secret, your imprisonment. You would be a legitimate heir, a threat to the Blackwood Empire. Ellie closed her eyes, feeling hot tears stream down her cheeks. So I'm not just a prisoner, I'm a Blackwood. She opened her eyes, facing Ethan with a mixture of horror and realization. I'm your sister. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan took a step back, as if he had taken a physical blow. His normally controlled expression was contorted into a mask of conflicting emotions. No, he finally said, his voice firm. Don't jump to conclusions. We need more evidence. What kind of evidence? Ellie asked, her voice trembling. A DNA test? If necessary. Ethan approached again, and this time Ellie didn't back away. But first, we need to find Hannah. If she's alive, she has the answers we're looking for. Ellie nodded slowly, trying to organize her thoughts. Where do we start? At the hospital. Ethan took out his cell phone. Mrs. Carson is there, and now that we know she was more than a simple housekeeper, I think it's time we paid her a visit. Lightning illuminated the library, projecting their shadows onto the bookshelves. For a moment, Ellie saw their reflections superimposed on the window. She and Ethan, so similar and yet so different, united by a secret that could both bring them closer and destroy them. And if she doesn't want to talk? Ellie asked. Ethan put the photos and documents back in his folder, his face assuming that determined expression that Ellie was beginning to know well. Everyone talks, Ellie. It's just a matter of finding the right motivation. As they left the library, Ellie couldn't help but notice how Ethan's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her. It was a protective gesture, almost intimate, and despite all the disturbing revelations of that afternoon, she found herself wishing that touch meant something different from what it probably meant. Because even if her blood carried the Blackwood name, her heart was beginning to carry something much more dangerous, a feeling that shouldn't exist, but was growing with each moment she spent by Ethan's side. Mercy Hospital was an imposing complex of glass and steel that rose against Chicago's gray sky. In the elevator going up to the intensive care wing, Ellie felt her heart hammering against her ribs. It was her first time in a hospital. Actually, it was her first time in any public place since her liberation. Ethan was at her side, his dark suit impeccably contrasting with the paleness of his face. He also seemed tense, though in a different way. His eyes were fixed on the changing numbers on the elevator's digital panel, his fingers unconsciously drumming on the folder he carried. "Remember," he said in a low voice, "let me speak first. Mrs. Carson had a stroke, but she's conscious. The doctor said she can communicate, though with some difficulty." Ellie nodded, nervously adjusting the collar of the navy blue dress that Ethan had provided for her. It was a simple but elegant model that made her look almost normal, almost as if she belonged to the outside world. The elevator stopped on the 8th floor. The doors opened to a silent corridor, illuminated by fluorescent lights that gave an unreal air to everything. A nurse guided them to a private room at the end of the corridor. Mrs. Carson was lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Ellie remembered. Half of her face was slightly drooping, an effect of the stroke. But her eyes, those eyes that for so long had been Ellie's only connection to the outside world, still maintained that penetrating intensity. When they entered the room, those eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Carson tried to move, but her body didn't respond as she wanted. A strangled sound escaped her throat. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carson," Ethan said, his voice controlled but with a hint of steel. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." Ellie remained a few steps behind him, watching the scene unfold. The housekeeper alternated her gaze between the two as if she were seeing ghosts. "No," Mrs. Carson's voice was hoarse, distorted. We shouldn't have found her," Ethan completed, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the bed. "Or we shouldn't be here together." Tears began to stream down the housekeeper's partially paralyzed face. Ellie felt something twist in her chest, a confused mixture of pity and anger. "Why?" Ellie took a step forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Why keep me locked up all these years?" Mrs. Carson closed her eyes, as if the question had physically hurt her. When she reopened them, her gaze was fixed on Ethan. "He promised," she managed to say. "My father?" Ethan leaned forward. "What did he promise, Mrs. Carson?" The housekeeper moved her head in a gesture that could be either affirmative or negative. Her hands, the right one still functional, the left one inert, fidgeted on the sheet. "Hannah," she whispered. Ellie felt her heart leap. "You knew my mother." A sob escaped Mrs. Carson's lips. With visible effort, she moved her right hand toward the bedside table. Ethan followed her gaze and opened the drawer, finding a small silver key. "What is this?" he asked, holding the key. "Safe," Mrs. Carson answered. "My room, mansion." Ethan put the key in his jacket pocket. "What will we find there, Mrs. Carson?" "Truth," she whispered. "All truth." Ellie approached the bed, sitting in the other chair. Despite everything, there was something familiar about Mrs. Carson's smell, a soft lavender perfume that always accompanied her, even in the darkest days of the basement. "Why now?" Ellie asked softly. "Why are you willing to tell the truth now?" The housekeeper turned her face to her with difficulty. "Because dying," her voice was weaker. "Take blame." "Blame for what?" Ethan pressed. But Mrs. Carson had closed her eyes again, her breathing becoming heavier. A monitor beside the bed began to emit a faster beep. "I think that's enough for today," a nurse said, entering the room. "She needs to rest." Ethan stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Let's go, Ellie. We have a safe to check." Ellie hesitated for a moment, looking at the woman who had been her jailer, and in some distorted way her only family for so many years. "Will you be all right?" Mrs. Carson opened her eyes one last time, and Ellie saw something in them that she had never seen before. "Regret, forgive," the housekeeper whispered. In the hospital corridor, Ellie felt her legs weaken. Ethan held her by the elbow, guiding her to a nearby bench. His touch was firm but gentle, and Ellie allowed herself to lean on him for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know." Ellie took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "It's strange to see her like this, vulnerable. For so long she was this figure of absolute authority in my life, and now she's just a sick woman, carrying secrets too heavy," Ethan completed, still holding her arm. Ellie looked at him, noticing how the fluorescent light created interesting shadows on his angular face. "What do you think we'll find in the safe?" "I don't know." He took the key from his pocket, turning it between his fingers. "But judging by her state, it must be something significant. Something she kept for a moment like this. Do you think they're evidence? Documents about my mother?" "Maybe." Ethan put the key away again. "But something tells me it's more than that. The way she looked at us two together." There was fear in her eyes, as if our proximity was something she had been instructed to avoid at all costs. Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine. Because of the possible kinship? Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes intense. Or because of what else we might discover together? The air between them seemed to become denser, charged with unspoken possibilities. Ellie felt her heart accelerate again, but for a completely different reason than the fear she had felt minutes before. "Let's go." Ethan stood up, extending his hand to help her. "The sooner we get to the mansion, the sooner we'll have answers." Ellie accepted his hand, feeling the strength of his fingers intertwined with hers. Even after she was standing, they remained that way for a moment, connected not only by touch but by something deeper and indefinable. As they walked to the elevator, Ellie couldn't help but think about how her life had changed in such a short time, from total isolation to immersion in a world of secrets and conspiracies, from absolute solitude to this intense and possibly forbidden connection with Ethan. And now, with the promise of answers so close, she wondered if she was really prepared for the truth, because something in her heart told her that, whatever the contents of that safe, it would change not only her past, but also her future, a future that, she was beginning to realize, was inexorably intertwined with that of Ethan Blackwood. Mrs. Carson's room was in an isolated wing of the mansion, a modest space compared to the rest of the house, but maintained with the same meticulous rigor she applied to everything in her life. Ethan and Ellie entered the room when night had already fallen over Chicago, bringing with it a fine mist that fogged the windows. "The safe must be somewhere here," Ethan murmured, his eyes scanning the walls of the room. Ellie observed every detail of the space: the perfectly made bed, the immaculate lace curtains, the silver crucifix above the headboard. It was strange to be there, invading her jailer's privacy. It was Ellie who found the safe hidden behind a small painting of the Virgin Mary. "Here," she called, her fingers touching the cold metal of the safe door. Ethan approached, his body close to hers as he inserted the key into the lock. His perfume, a sophisticated mixture of wood and amber, invaded Ellie's senses, making her heart race. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing its contents: a red velvet box and a thick envelope, yellowed by time. Ethan took the envelope, first opening it carefully. Inside were old photographs and documents. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he examined the first photo. Ellie leaned in to see and felt the air flee from her lungs. It was an image of Hannah, her mother, in a sunny garden wearing a white summer dress. She smiled at the camera, one hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. At her side, with a protective arm around her waist, was Victor Blackwood. "They look happy," Ellie said, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan continued searching through the documents, his face growing paler with each page he read. "Here," he said, extending an official paper to Ellie. "It's your birth certificate, original." Ellie took the document with trembling hands. There it was, in black ink on yellowed paper. Eleanor Hannah Blackwood, born March 15th, 2007. Mother, Hannah Sanders. Father, Victor Blackwood. "So it's true," she murmured, feeling hot tears stream down her cheeks. "I am my sister," Ethan completed, his voice hoarse. He stepped away a few paces, running his hands through his dark hair in a gesture of agitation. "But this doesn't make sense. Why hide you? Why not?" "There's more." Ellie took the red velvet box, opening it carefully. Inside rested an emerald necklace, the same one her mother wore in the photo they had found in the library. Along with the necklace was a smaller envelope, simply addressed to Ellie. With trembling fingers, she opened it, unfolding a letter, written in an elegant feminine handwriting. "My dear daughter," Ellie began to read aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "If you are reading this, it means you have finally discovered the truth about your origin. I never wanted to abandon you. I was forced to flee to protect us both from something terrible I discovered about the Blackwood Empire." Ethan approached, again his presence a source of warmth and comfort at Ellie's back as she continued reading. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals wasn't just a drug company. Your father, Victor, was conducting illegal experiments in poor communities in the Midwest. Experimental drugs, unauthorized tests, covered-up deaths. When I discovered the truth, I was pregnant with you. I tried to confront him, threatened to expose everything. That's when I understood that he wouldn't let me go, not with you, his legitimate heir, growing in my womb. Ellie stopped reading, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold the paper. Ethan gently took the letter from her hands, continuing the reading. I planned my escape, but something went wrong. Mrs. Carson, whom I believed to be my ally, was actually loyal to Victor. She betrayed me, managed to separate me from you at the hospital. She faked my death and hid you in the basement, following your father's orders to keep you safe and silenced. I spent years trying to find you, following false leads, facing threats. Now, with the evidence I've gathered about Blackwood's crimes, I finally have bargaining power. When you read this letter, I'll know you're free. And then I can, finally, come back for you. With all my love, Hannah. The silence that followed was deafening. Ellie felt her legs weaken and would have fallen if Ethan hadn't supported her, guiding her to sit on the edge of the bed. She's alive, Ellie whispered, incredulous. My mother is alive, and spent all these years trying to find me. Ethan knelt before her, his hands holding hers tightly. Ellie, listen to me. We need to be very careful now. If what this letter says is true, you weren't just hidden. You were being kept as a guarantee, a form of control over your mother, so she wouldn't expose the company's crimes. But your father is dead now, Ellie said, her eyes meeting his. Who would still have an interest in keeping these secrets buried? The board of directors, the shareholders, everyone who benefited from the profits of these illegal experiments. Ethan stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around the room. And what if my father's death wasn't natural? What if someone discovered he was thinking of telling the truth? Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine. Is that why Mrs. Carson decided to reveal everything now? Does she know who killed your father? Possibly. Ethan stopped his pacing, turning to face her. And that means you're still in danger. Anyone who discovers your true identity. He didn't complete the sentence, but he didn't need to. Ellie could see the fear in his eyes, a fear that mirrored her own. What do we do now? She asked, standing up. Ethan approached her, so close that Ellie could feel his breath. We need to find your mother before they find her. She has the evidence that can bring down the entire Blackwood empire, and you're willing to help destroy your family's legacy. My family? Ethan let out a bitter laugh. My family lied, killed, and destroyed lives, and kept my own sister prisoner for 18 years. He brought a hand to Ellie's face, his fingers gently tracing her cheek. But you're different. You're the only real thing I've found amid all these lies. His touch sent waves of electricity through Ellie's entire body. She knew she should step away. He was her brother, after all. But there was something stronger than blood or DNA in that moment. Something that had begun to grow from the first moment he opened the door to her prison. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling, this that we're feeling. I know, he answered, his voice hoarse. It's wrong. It's impossible. It's inevitable, Ellie completed, and before she could think better of it, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was like an electric shock, an explosion of sensations that neither was prepared to feel. For a moment, Ethan responded with the same intensity, his hands burying themselves in her hair, pulling her closer. But then, as if remembering something painful, he abruptly pulled away. We can't, he said, his voice choked. Not like this. Not while there's the possibility. The possibility of being siblings, Ellie completed, feeling her heart break. A little. We need to discover the whole truth first, Ethan said, though his eyes were still fixed on her lips. Find your mother. Understand exactly what happened. Ellie nodded, trying to ignore the whirlwind of emotions in her chest. Where do we start? With the hospital records from the time of your birth, Ethan began to put the documents and photographs back in his folder. And then we need to talk to Mrs. Carson again. She knows more than she's telling. As they left the room, Ellie couldn't help but touch her lips, still tingling from the kiss. Around her neck, her mother's emerald necklace seemed to pulse with the weight of all the secrets that were yet to come. The truth was getting closer, but Ellie was beginning to wonder if she was really prepared to face it, not just for the crimes it might reveal, but for what it would mean for this forbidden and overwhelming feeling that was growing between her and Ethan. The rain had stopped, but the city was still wrapped in a dense fog when Ethan parked his car in the underground garage of Mercy Hospital. It was shortly after midnight, and the silence in the parking lot was broken only by the echo of their footsteps and the distant hum of the fluorescent lights. "Are you sure you can get access to the archives at this hour?" Ellie asked, adjusting Ethan's borrowed coat around her shoulders. The fabric still carried his scent, a distraction she tried to ignore. "I know the hospital director," Ethan replied, guiding her toward a side entrance. "And Blackwood Pharmaceuticals is one of the largest donors to this institution. Some doors always remain open for us." Ellie noticed the bitter tone in his voice when he mentioned the company. Since the discovery of the documents in Mrs. Carson's safe, something had changed in Ethan. The mask of control he always maintained was beginning to show cracks. The medical records corridor was deserted when they arrived. Ethan used a magnetic card to open the door, revealing a room filled with physical files and computers. "The 2007 records should be here," he said, heading to a specific section. "Look for anything related to Hannah Sanders or Eleanor Blackwood." They worked in silence for a few minutes, the sound of papers being handled filling the air. It was Ellie who found it first. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling, "look at this." It was an admission record in the name of Hannah Sanders, dated March 15, 2007, the day of Ellie's birth. But there was something strange in the records. "Twins," Ethan read aloud, his face paling. "Here it says that Hannah Sanders was admitted for a twin birth." Ellie felt her heart skip a beat. 2 babies. A girl and... Ethan stopped, his eyes fixed on the paper. A boy. The silence that followed was deafening. Ellie looked at Ethan, really looked, as if seeing him for the first time. The same dark eyes she saw in the mirror, the same face shape she had inherited from Hannah. "No," she whispered. "It can't be—" "Yes, it can." A familiar voice interrupted them. At the archive door, Richard Morris, financial director of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, pointed a gun at them. "And that's exactly why you two should never have met." Ethan instinctively placed himself in front of Ellie. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "Protecting the company's interests, as I've always done." Richard entered the room, closing the door behind him. "Your father trusted me to keep certain secrets buried." "It was you?" Ethan asked, his voice laden with anger. "You killed my father." Victor was getting careless, sentimental. Richard gave a cold smile. He started talking about fixing mistakes, about reuniting the family. We couldn't allow that. Ellie held Ethan's arm tightly, feeling him tremble with fury. "Why? Why separate us two?" "Because together you're too dangerous." Richard pointed the gun directly at Ethan's chest. "Twins, children of Hannah Sanders and Victor Blackwood. Legitimate. Heirs not only to the fortune, but also to all the evidence your mother collected about our special operations." "So it's true." Ethan took a step forward, ignoring the gun. "The experiments in the Midwest." "Your father was a visionary," Richard said. "He understood that some lives needed to be sacrificed for the progress of science. But Hannah..." He shook his head. "She didn't share that vision. When she threatened to expose us, we had to take measures." "Separating the twins," Ellie completed, the pieces fitting into place in her mind. "One to be raised as the Blackwood heir, another to be kept as a guarantee. We needed a legitimate heir to keep up appearances." Richard looked at Ethan. "You were chosen because you were stronger, healthier. Ellie stayed with Mrs. Carson because I was born sick," Ellie interrupted, remembering Mrs. Carson's whispered words over the years. "The weak baby who needed to be protected." It's a convenient excuse to keep you hidden. Richard took another step toward them. "But now that you've discovered the truth, I have no choice. The company can't risk..." What happened next was too fast for Ellie to process completely. Ethan moved, like lightning advancing against Richard. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room at the same instant the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. Ellie heard sounds of struggle, something heavy falling to the floor. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it would explode. When the emergency lights came on, revealing their ghostly red glow, she saw Ethan and Richard on the floor, fighting for the gun. "Ellie, run!" Ethan shouted, his voice strangled. But she couldn't leave him. Not now. Not her brother. Not the man who, despite everything, had become the center of her universe. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, Ellie grabbed a heavy metal file and threw it against Richard's head. The impact was enough to make him release the gun, which slid away. Ethan quickly immobilized Richard, using his own tie to tie his hands. "Are you okay?" he asked Ellie, his face marked by a cut on his eyebrow. She nodded, trembling. "The bullet grazed me." Ethan showed a bloody tear in the sleeve of his jacket. "Nothing serious." The sound of footsteps in the corridor alerted them. Voices were approaching, probably security attracted by the sound of the gunshot. "I need to go," Ethan said, taking the documents they had found. "Now!" They ran down the corridor, leaving Richard tied up in the archive. The cold night air hit them when they emerged through an emergency exit, running toward Ethan's car. Only when they were in the safety of the vehicle, accelerating through the empty streets of Chicago, did Ellie allow the tears to come. "We're twins," she whispered, looking at Ethan. "Really siblings." Ethan kept his eyes on the road, but Ellie could see the gleam of unshed tears in his eyes too. "This changes everything." "Does it really?" she asked softly, remembering the kiss they had shared hours before. Ethan finally looked at her, and, in that look, there were so many emotions that Ellie felt her heart ache. "It changes what we are to each other, but it doesn't change what we feel." He turned his eyes back to the road. "And that's exactly what terrifies me." Ellie extended her hand, lightly touching his injured arm. "Where are we going now?" "To the only safe place I know." Ethan made a sharp turn, entering a less busy street. "And then we're going to find our mother. She's the only one who can help us understand all of this." The city passed like a blur through the window, lights and shadows mixing as in a feverish dream. Ellie touched the emerald necklace around her neck, the only tangible connection she had with Hannah, with her past, with the truth. A truth that she now knew was much more complex and painful than she could ever have imagined. Because Ethan wasn't just her savior, her protector, the man she was inevitably falling in love with. He was her twin brother, her other half, a mirror of her own soul. And as they raced through the night, fleeing from assassins and deadly secrets, Ellie wondered if it was possible that love, this overwhelming and forbidden feeling growing between them, was strong, enough to overcome even the blood ties that bound them. Ethan's safe place was an apartment on the top floor of an Art Deco building in Chicago's Old Town. The space was surprisingly modest for someone of his position, a loft with exposed brick walls, minimalist furniture, and large windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. "No one knows about this place," he explained, locking the door behind them. "I bought it in the name of a shell company. It's where I come when I need to disappear." Ellie walked to one of the windows, watching the city lights that were beginning to go out with the approach of dawn. Her reflection in the glass seemed ethereal, almost unreal, just as this entire night seemed unreal. "Do you need to disappear often?" she asked, turning to face him. Ethan had taken off his bloodied jacket and was now examining the wound on his arm in the adjacent bathroom. "More often than I'd like," he answered, his voice echoing slightly. "The corporate world can be as violent as a war." Ellie approached the bathroom, watching him clean the cut with expertise. "Let me help," she offered, taking the antiseptic from his hands. The touch of her fingers on his skin sent that familiar electric current through her body. Even knowing what they now knew, the attraction between them seemed to have only intensified, as if the universe itself was mocking their impossible situation. "How did you learn to do this?" she asked, trying to concentrate on the task of cleaning the wound. "Military academy," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on her. Our father, insisted I have complete training before taking over the company, including first aid." The mention of Victor Blackwood brought back the reality of their situation. Ellie finished the dressing in silence, her mind racing with all the night's revelations. How could he do that? She whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. Separate. Newborn twins condemn one of his own children to a life of isolation. Power, Ethan answered, his voice laden with bitterness. It was always about power. The empire he built, the illegal experiments, the secrets. We were just pieces in his game. Ellie moved away, returning to the living room. Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the wall, the only personal decoration in the apartment. It showed a boy of about 8, smiling next to a horse. "Is that you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The boy had her eyes, her smile. Ethan approached from behind her, so close that she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "My last happy memory from childhood," he said softly, "before the incident in the basement." Ellie turned to face him, realizing too late how close they were. "Do you think it was Richard? The one responsible for locking you up that day?" "It makes sense now." Ethan brought a hand to her face, his fingers gently tracing her cheek. "He probably wanted to remind me of my place, of the power they had over me." "Ethan," Ellie whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We can't." "I know." But he didn't remove his hand. Instead, his fingers slid to her nape, burying themselves in her hair. "Tell me this is wrong, that it's just the trauma, the adrenaline, the shock of the discoveries. And if it's not?" Ellie held the front of his shirt, torn between pulling him closer or pushing him away. "What if it's something more? Something that was destined to happen the moment you opened that door in the basement?" "Destiny?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Destiny made us twins, Ellie. Separated us for 18 years, only to reunite us in this cruel way." "Maybe." She hesitated, lost in his eyes. Her own eyes in a masculine face that seemed to have been sculpted to torture her. "Maybe that's why the connection is so strong, because we're two halves of the same soul, separated at birth. And now that we've found each other," Ethan tilted his head, his lips inches from hers. "Now it's too late to go back," Ellie completed, and then they eliminated the distance between them. The kiss was different from the first, no longer hesitant or exploratory, but desperate, hungry, as if they were trying to compensate for 18 years of forced separation in a single moment. Ethan's hands went to her waist, pulling her against his body with an urgency that made Ellie moan against his lips. It was the sound that broke the spell. Ethan pulled away abruptly, as if he had received a shock. His face was flushed, his dark eyes shining with a mixture of desire and guilt. "I can't do this to you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I can't be another person hurting you." "You're not hurting me," Ellie protested, trying to approach again. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete. Because we're twins." Ethan ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "That's why the connection is so strong. It's biological. It's love," Ellie interrupted, her voice firm despite the tears that were beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't care what kind of love it is, or if it's wrong, or if the whole world will condemn us. It's real." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "That's why we need to find our mother," he finally said. "Not just for the evidence against the company, but because we need to understand everything." Ellie nodded slowly. "Where do we start?" "With the documents we got from the hospital." Ethan walked to his folder, spreading the papers on the coffee table. "There has to be some clue about where Hannah went after losing us." They worked in silence for the next few minutes, maintaining a safe distance from each other as they examined the records. It was Ellie who found something interesting. "Look at this," she called. "In the hospital transfer documents, there's a mention of a private clinic in Lake Geneva. That's where they took you after the separation." "Lake Geneva?" Ethan frowned. "The family has an old house there. I used to spend summers in that region when I was a child." "Do you think it wasn't a coincidence?" "Nothing in this story is coincidence." Ethan took out his phone. "I'm going to make some calls, try to find out if anyone in the town remembers Hannah." "And what about Richard?" Ellie asked. He's certainly freed himself by now. He must be looking for us. That's why we need to be quick. Ethan put the documents away again. Pack a bag with the essentials. We leave in an hour. Ellie nodded, heading to the bathroom to prepare. In the mirror, her reflection seemed different, stronger, more determined. Her mother's emerald necklace gleamed around her neck, a promise of answers to come. But as she prepared for this new escape, her mind kept returning to the kiss, to the sensation of Ethan's arms around her, to the way her body seemed to recognize his at a molecular level. It was wrong. Her entire existence screamed that it was wrong. So why did it seem as inevitable as the sunrise that was beginning to tinge the horizon pink? The road to Lake Geneva wound through the Wisconsin countryside, like a dark ribbon cutting through the green landscape. The morning sun filtered through the trees, creating dancing patterns on the hood of Ethan's sports car. Ellie watched the scenery pass by through the window, amazed at the vastness of the world beyond the walls of her former captivity. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, noticing her prolonged silence. "We can stop if you need to rest." "I'm fine," she replied, turning to look at him. "Just absorbing everything. It's the first time I've seen a lake." They had just passed a curve that revealed the lake in the distance, a blue-green mirror that stretched to the horizon. Ellie felt her heart accelerate at the sight, one more first in a life that now seemed overflowing with them. "When this is all over," Ethan said softly, "I'll take you to see every place you missed in these 18 years. If we survive all." "This," Ellie completed, her hand unconsciously touching the emerald necklace. Ethan reached for his cell phone on the center console, checking the messages once more. "My contact in Lake Geneva confirmed that there are records of a woman resembling Hannah living in the town for a few months after our birth. She worked at an inn near the historic center. And then? She disappeared." He gripped the steering wheel tightly, like smoke. Ellie closed her eyes, trying to imagine her mother, young, desperate, fleeing with evidence that could destroy a pharmaceutical empire. "Do you think she's still alive?" "The letter in Mrs. Carson's safe was recent," Ethan replied. "And Richard seemed genuinely concerned about the possibility of her appearing with the evidence. So yes, I think she is." Silence reigned again in the car, filled only by the soft sound of the engine and the occasional bird song coming from the forest. Ellie observed Ethan's profile as he drove, the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes, the small scar near his temple that she was beginning to notice. Her twin brother, her mirror, her torment. "About last night," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "Ellie," Ethan interrupted, his voice tense. "Please. We need to talk about this." "Not now." He took a sharp curve with more force than necessary. "Not while we're racing against time, fleeing from assassins and looking for our missing mother." "And when then?" Ellie insisted. "When it's safe? When we have all the answers? Do you really think it will get easier?" Ethan braked abruptly, pulling the car onto the shoulder. The road was deserted, surrounded by dense forest on both sides. He turned to face her, his dark eyes stormy. "What do you want me to say, Ellie? That I can't stop thinking about you? That every time I touch you I feel like my skin is on fire? That even knowing it's wrong, that it's sick, that it's—" He stopped, taking a deep breath. "That even so, the only thing I want is to kiss you again." Ellie felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes," she whispered, "I want you to be honest, like I'm being." "Honesty?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Okay, let's be honest. We're twins separated at birth by a megalomaniacal father and a criminal corporation. We grew up in completely different worlds. You locked in a basement, me locked in privileges and expectations. We met in the most unlikely circumstances and fell in love before discovering the truth. And now?" He ran his hands over his face in frustration. "Now we're caught between what we feel and what we are." "And what if we aren't?" Ellie asked softly. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if the documents are fake? What if all this is another manipulation?" She took the birth certificate they had found from her pocket. "Think about it. Why keep such incriminating records? Why would Mrs. Carson keep evidence that could destroy the entire scheme?" You think. Ethan took the document, examining it carefully. You think we're not really siblings? I think we can't trust anything until we find our mother, the only person who knows the whole truth. The silence that followed was loaded with possibilities. Ellie could see Ethan's mind working, processing this new perspective. Even so, he said finally, we can't. Ellie leaned in, silencing him with a kiss. It was brief, just a brush of lips, but loaded with promise and challenge. We can't fight against this, she whispered against his lips. It's bigger than us. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if in pain. You'll be my ruin, Ellie. Or your salvation. She touched his face gently. But first, we need to find Hannah. We need the truth. He nodded slowly, moving away to restart the car. But before he could shift into gear, a familiar sound cut through the air, the distant whirring of a helicopter. Get down! Ethan shouted, pulling Ellie down just as a burst of gunfire hit the windshield, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. The helicopter passed over them, turning to make another pass. Ellie saw the Blackwood Pharmaceuticals logo painted on the side of the aircraft. How did they find us? She shouted over the noise of the rotors. Car's GPS, Ethan replied, starting the engine. I was an idiot not to think of that before. He accelerated, making the car skid on the wet road before gaining speed. The helicopter followed them, more bullets ricocheting off the asphalt around them. Hold tight, Ethan shouted, making a sharp turn onto a secondary dirt road. The branches of trees scraped against the roof of the car as they advanced through the woods, the helicopter momentarily losing sight of them. Ellie held onto the dashboard tightly, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. But amid the chaos and fear, a certainty grew in her chest. No matter what they discovered in Lake Geneva, no matter what the truth was about their kinship, what she felt for Ethan was real and inevitable as gravity itself. And as they fled through the forest, pursued by assassins and deadly secrets, she knew she would do anything to protect that love, even if it meant facing the whole world. The dirt road ended abruptly in a clearing, where an old colonial building rose among the trees, a 2-story mansion with peeling walls and windows, covered with boards. Ethan braked the damaged car behind the building, hiding it from the helicopter's view that was still flying over the region. The summer house, he explained, turning off the engine, where I was kept prisoner at 10 years old. Ellie looked at the somber building, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Why did you bring us here? Because it's the last place they would look for us. Ethan checked the ammunition in a pistol he had taken from the glove compartment, and because I suspect it wasn't a coincidence that I was locked up precisely here. They got out of the car, running crouched to the back door. The sound of the helicopter was more distant now, but still audible. Ethan forced the entrance with expertise, revealing a dusty and abandoned interior. The basement is this way, he said, guiding Ellie through a dark corridor. Their hands were intertwined, both out of necessity and an instinctive desire for contact. The basement was larger than Ellie expected, with various divisions and old shelves covered by sheets. The air was heavy with decades of secrets. It was here, Ethan pointed to a metal door at the back of the room. 3 days locked up, without food, without water. Ellie approached the door, her fingers tracing old marks on the metal surface. You tried to escape, until my hands bled. He approached behind her, his body emanating heat in the cold environment. But the strangest thing wasn't the marks I made, it was the ones that were already there. Ellie frowned, examining the door more carefully. Under the dust and rust there were older scratches, marks of other hands, other prisoners. It wasn't just a basement, she whispered. It was a cell. Exactly. Ethan took a flashlight from his pocket, illuminating the walls. And I bet we'll find more than just bad memories here. They began to examine the basement methodically, moving sheets and checking every corner. It was Ellie who found the first clue, a loose board in the floor hidden under a moldy rug. Ethan, she called, kneeling to remove the board. Inside the hiding place was a metal box, the kind used to store documents. Ethan knelt beside her, his thigh pressed against hers in the tight space. The contact sent waves of electricity through Ellie's entire body, but she tried to concentrate on the task at hand. The box was locked, but the lock was old and easily gave way when Ethan forced it. Inside were folders, photographs, and a leather-bound diary. "My God," Ethan whispered, taking one of the photos. It was an image of several people, adults and children, in what appeared to be a rural Midwestern town. All showed visible signs of illness, skin patches, swelling, deformities. "The guinea pigs," Ellie said, her voice choked. "The people the company used to test their drugs." Ethan continued searching through the documents, his face growing paler with each page he read. They weren't just random tests, it was a systematic program. They chose isolated communities, offered free medical treatment, and then they used the people like lab rats, Ellie completed, feeling nauseous. And Hannah discovered it. All. Ethan took the diary, leafing through its yellowed pages. "This diary, it's hers." Ellie held his arm tightly, leaning in to read along. The handwriting was the same as the letter they had found in Mrs. Carson's safe. "Dear Diary," Ellie read aloud, her voice trembling. "Today I confirmed my suspicions about the tests. Victor isn't just developing new medications, he's creating biological weapons. The drugs they test in communities are just the surface. The real project, codenamed Project Twins, is much more sinister." Ethan turned the page abruptly, his fingers trembling. "Project Twins," Ellie continued reading. "They are developing a compound that can alter human DNA at the most fundamental level. The goal is to create super soldiers, people with enhanced physical and mental capabilities. But the tests have been disastrous. Most subjects die or develop horrible mutations. And now," she stopped, her voice failing. "Continue," Ethan whispered, though his face suggested he already suspected what was coming. "And now Victor wants to use our own children as test subjects, the twins I carry in my womb. He says they are the perfect candidates, genetically identical, controlled since conception. One will receive the compound, the other will serve as a control. I cannot allow this. I cannot let him transform my babies into laboratory experiments. I need to flee. I need to protect them." The diary fell from her trembling hands, raising a cloud of dust from the floor. Ellie felt the world spin around her, memories of her childhood in the basement taking on a new and terrible meaning. "The injections," she whispered. "Every week Mrs. Carson gave me injections. She said it was to keep me healthy." Ethan held her face between his hands, his eyes examining every detail of her features as if looking for signs of alteration. "You were the test subject," he said, his voice hoarse with horror. "And I was the control. So that's why they kept me hidden. It wasn't just to control Hannah, it was to continue the experiments." A sound above them made them freeze, footsteps on the upper floor. The helicopter must have located the car. "We need to go," Ethan whispered, quickly putting the diary and the most important documents in his jacket. "There's a secret passage that leads to the lake. It was used for smuggling in colonial times." But before they could move, the basement door opened with a bang. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and authoritative voices filled the space. "Freeze! Federal Bureau of Investigation." Ellie felt Ethan try to pull her back, protecting her with his body, but it was too late. They were surrounded. "Ethan." "Blackwood," a familiar female voice sounded in the darkness. "And Ellie, or should I say Experiment T1? A woman came down the stairs, her face illuminated by the weak light. Hannah Sanders, 18 years older than in the photograph, but unmistakable. "Mom?" Ellie and Ethan said in unison. Hannah smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Finally, my twins are reunited. Now we can complete what we began 18 years ago." Ellie felt Ethan's arm tighten around her waist, pulling her closer. At that moment, it didn't matter if they were siblings, lovers, or guinea pigs in an insane experiment. All that mattered was that they were together, and that, for the first time since this whole story began, the truth was about to come to light, even if that truth was more terrible than either of them could have imagined. The key basement of the old colonial house had transformed into an arena where 18 years of secrets converged in a single explosive moment. Hannah Sanders, now wearing an FBI badge and a bulletproof vest, descended the last steps with the feline elegance of a predator. "Lower your weapons," she ordered the agents surrounding them. "They're my children." Ellie felt Ethan tense beside her, his fingers still intertwined with hers with an almost painful force. "Children?" he repeated, his voice laden with bitterness. "Is that how you see us, after using us as lab rats?" Hannah stopped a few meters from them, her eyes the same, dark eyes that Ellie saw in the mirror every morning, studying them with a mixture of indecipherable emotions. "You don't understand," she said softly. "You never understood the true purpose of all this." "Then explain it to us." Ellie took a step forward, still holding Ethan's hand. "Explain why you condemned me to 18 years of darkness, why you separated us, why I allowed the experiments on you to continue," Hannah completed, her face softening for a moment. "Because it was the only way to ensure the compound wouldn't be used on other children. Other families." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "So you're the hero of the story? The double agent who infiltrated Blackwood Pharmaceuticals to expose their crimes?" "No," Hannah replied, taking something from her pocket, a syringe with a fluorescent blue liquid. "I'm the scientist who created the original compound, and the mother who spent 18 years perfecting it to save her children." The silence that followed was deafening. Ellie felt the world spin around her, memories of countless injections in her past taking on a new and terrible meaning. "You?" she whispered. "You created this?" "Project Twins was mine," Hannah confirmed, taking another step toward them. "An attempt to create a controlled evolution of human DNA. But Victor and the military wanted to use the research to create weapons. When I discovered I was pregnant with twins, I saw a unique opportunity." "Opportunity?" Ethan practically spat the word. "We were babies." "You were the chance to prove the compound could be used for good," Hannah continued, her eyes shining with an almost feverish intensity. "Ellie received the first version, imperfect, unstable. You, Ethan, would be the control. And over these 18 years, while I infiltrated the FBI, built evidence against Blackwood, and perfected the formula, I was able to monitor the effects on Ellie through Mrs. Carson." Ellie felt her legs weaken. Ethan held her by the waist, keeping her standing. "The effects?" she asked, fearing the answer. Hannah smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You never wondered why you learned to read by yourself in the basement? Why you could memorize entire books with a single reading? Why your senses are so sharp, your emotions so intense?" "The compound worked," Ethan concluded, horror in his voice. "You created your own perfect guinea pig." "I created an evolution," Hannah corrected. "And now, with the formula finally stable, I can complete the process in both of you." She raised the syringe, the weak light of the basement making the blue liquid glow like a fallen star. "Don't you understand?" Hannah seemed genuinely frustrated. "What you feel for each other, this intense connection, this attraction impossible to resist, is part of the process. The compound doesn't just alter DNA, it creates psychic bonds. Why do you think you were kept separate? Together, your power would be impossible to control." Ellie felt Ethan's body shudder beside her. His words from the night before echoed in her mind. "It's bigger than us." "The love we feel," she began, "is chemical," Hannah completed. "A bond created in a laboratory, amplified by years of forced separation. And with the final version of the compound, it could be even stronger. You would be unstoppable." "No," Ethan said firmly, pulling Ellie behind him. "I won't let you transform what we feel into another sick experiment." Hannah sighed, making a subtle gesture with her hand. Immediately, the agents around them raised their weapons again. "I'm not asking permission," she said softly. "You are my greatest creation, my perfect twins. And now, finally, I can complete what I began 18 years ago." Ellie felt something awaken inside her, a strength she didn't know she possessed, a power that perhaps had always been there, waiting to be discovered. "You're wrong," she said, her voice loaded with an authority that made Hannah step back. What I feel for Ethan wasn't created in a laboratory. It can't be explained by chemistry or modified DNA. She intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the same electric current as always course through her body. But now there was something more, a deeper connection, as if their minds were touching. Ethan felt it too. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in his touch. "It's love," he completed, and Ellie could hear his voice both in her ears and in her mind. Real, imperfect, and human, and you can't control that. Hannah watched the scene with a mixture of scientific fascination and maternal horror. "The process has already begun," she whispered. "The neural synchronicity, the emerging telepathy—" "Enough!" Ellie shouted, and her voice seemed to make the very walls of the basement tremble. The flashlights flickered, and for a moment the entire environment seemed to bend to her will. That's when chaos erupted. A deafening boom came from the upper floor, not from the helicopter or the police, but from something else. Something that made Hannah turn pale. "No," she whispered. "Not now." The basement ceiling began to crack, dust and pieces of concrete raining down on them. Ellie felt Ethan pull her away, toward the secret passage he had mentioned before. "They've come for the compound," Hannah shouted above the noise of destruction. "The army, the international buyers, all of them." "Run!" Ethan shouted to Ellie, pushing her through a hidden door while chaos installed itself in the basement. The last glimpse Ellie had of her mother was of her wielding her gun against shadows descending the stairs, shadows that didn't belong to the federal agents. As they ran through the dark tunnel that led to the lake, Ellie held Ethan's hand tightly. In her mind, she could feel his thoughts mixing with hers, fear, love, determination. It didn't matter what Hannah had done to them. It didn't matter if their love had begun in a test tube or in the depths of their souls. What mattered was that they were together, and that, for the first time in their lives, they were choosing their own destiny. The colonial tunnel ended in a small, isolated cove, surrounded by dark rocks and dense vegetation. The rain had started again, fine and cold, mixing with the lake spray rising from the agitated water. Ellie and Ethan emerged on the shore, breathless, their clothes dirty with earth and dust from the tunnel. "This way," Ethan said, guiding her, among the rocks. But he didn't need to. Ellie could feel the direction in his mind as if his thoughts were her own. This new connection between them was different from anything they had ever experienced. They weren't just emotions or vague sensations, but complete thoughts, images, memories. It was as if their minds had merged into a single consciousness, amplifying everything they already felt for each other. "The compound," Ellie said as they moved quickly along the shore. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" "Yes." Ethan stopped, behind a larger rock pulling her close. "I can feel everything. Your thoughts, your fears, your need," she completed, looking into his eyes. Even in the twilight of the storm, she could see the reflection of her own soul in that gaze. For a moment they forgot the pursuit, the shots that still echoed from the colonial house, the helicopter that flew over the region. There was only that overwhelming connection between them, that desire that transcended DNA and scientific experiments. Ethan touched her face with trembling fingers. "Ellie," he whispered, and in her mind she could feel the full extent of what he wanted to say. All the love, the fear, the guilt, and the absolute certainty that, no matter what they were to each other, this was real. "I know," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "I feel it too." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. It was as if their souls were touching, memories and emotions flowing between them like electricity. Ellie felt Ethan's lonely childhood, the silent dinners with Victor, the terror of those 3 days in the basement. Ethan felt her years of isolation, the stories she created to stay sane, the way she observed the world through a single crack of light. When they separated, both were trembling, not just from the cold rain, but from the intensity of the experience. "What Hannah did to us," Ethan said, his voice hoarse, "this connection—" "It doesn't matter how it began," Ellie interrupted, holding his face between her hands. "What matters is what we choose to do with it." A closer boom brought them back to reality. Flashlight beams were beginning to appear at the entrance of the tunnel. "Come," Ethan pulled her again. "There's a boat anchored further ahead. We can—" He stopped abruptly, and Ellie felt the reason before she even saw. Hannah was standing a few meters ahead of them, the syringe with the blue liquid, still in her hand. Her face was bruised, a cut above her eyebrow was bleeding, but her eyes shone with an almost supernatural intensity. "Impressive," she said, observing them with a clinical interest that made Ellie's stomach turn. "The neural synchronization is much more advanced than I expected. You can already share thoughts, can't you?" "Why?" Ellie took a step forward, feeling Ethan's hand tighten on hers in warning. "Why do all this? We were your children." "Precisely because of that," Hannah exclaimed, a note of desperation in her voice. "You were perfect, identical twins, genetically pure, conceived and monitored under controlled conditions. The chance to create a new species, a directed evolution of humanity." "You're insane," Ethan said, but Ellie could feel the pain behind his words, the pain of realizing that their own mother saw them only as experiments. "I'm a visionary," Hannah corrected. "The world is dying, consumed by wars, diseases, greed, but you could be the beginning of something new. Evolved humans, connected at a fundamental level, capable of falling in love," Ellie interrupted. "Is that what you wanted, to create an artificial love between siblings?" Hannah smiled, a sad, almost maternal smile. "The love between you isn't artificial. It's proof that the compound worked beyond my expectations. The attraction, the psychic connection, they're manifestations of an evolution that transcends our limited morality." "No," Ethan took a step forward, placing himself partially in front of Ellie. "What we feel for each other exists, despite what you did, not because of it." A new boom shook the shore closer now. Voices and footsteps were approaching from both directions. "There's no more time," Hannah said, raising the syringe. "The final compound needs to be administered now before they arrive. With it, you'll be unstoppable. You can—" "No," Ellie shouted, and something exploded inside her. An invisible wave of energy emanated from her body, throwing Hannah backward and making the syringe fly from her hand. The small glass tube spun in the air in slow motion, the blue liquid shining like a shooting star before shattering on the rocks. Hannah screamed, a sound of pure agony that made Ellie shudder. "No, 18 years of work. The only stable sample." But Ellie wasn't listening anymore. A new sensation was taking over her. Power, pure and electric, running through her veins. At her side, Ethan also seemed different, as if something inside him had awakened. "Ellie," he said in her mind, "something's happening." She could feel it. The original compound in her blood, dormant for so long, was reacting to her connection with Ethan. It was as if their bodies were adapting to each other, finding their own balance. "Impossible," Hannah whispered, observing them with a mixture of fear and fascination. "The synchronization is happening naturally, without the final catalyst." Shots began to echo across the shore. Her group of men in black tactical uniforms emerged from the tunnel, while another approached from the opposite side of the shore. In the sky, the helicopter was making a new approach. "Come," Ethan pulled Ellie toward the lake. In their connected minds, she could see his plan. Swim to the boat anchored further out, use the darkness and rain as cover. "No," Hannah shouted behind them. "You don't understand. Without the final compound, the mutation is unstable. You could—" More shots cut through the night, and Hannah fell on the sand with a muffled cry. Ellie wanted to go back, a filial instinct that not even 18 years of abandonment had erased, but Ethan held her. "We can't help her," he said, both aloud and in her mind. "We need to go. Now." Ellie nodded, allowing him to guide her to the dark waters. The lake was agitated, violent waves beating against the rocks, but somehow she knew exactly how to move, as if Ethan's knowledge about navigation had become hers too. As they swam away from the shore, under the cover of the intensifying storm, Ellie could feel the changes happening inside her. The compound was awakening, responding to Ethan's presence, creating something new and inexplicable. But one thing she knew for certain: What she felt for him, this deep and overwhelming love, wasn't the result of experiments or genetic manipulation. It was something older than science, stronger than DNA. It was destiny, and against that not even the most brilliant scientist could fight. The boat was an old medium-sized sailboat anchored approximately 200 meters from the shore. The rain had turned into a tempest, giant waves sweeping the surface of the lake as Ellie and Ethan swam in perfect synchrony. Through their mental connection growing stronger by the moment, they managed to coordinate their movements as if they were a single organism. When they finally reached the sailboat, Ethan helped Ellie climb up first, their bodies trembling, not just from the cold, but from the intensity of the changes they could feel happening inside them. The compound was evolving, adapting, creating something that not even Hannah had foreseen. "We need to set sail before they send boats after us," Ethan said, moving quickly across the deck with the familiarity of someone who knew the vessel well. Ellie followed him to the command cabin, their minds so synchronized that she knew exactly what he planned to do. "The emergency generator," she said, heading to a side panel while Ethan initiated the startup sequence. "We need power for the radio and GPS." They worked in silence for a few minutes, moving through the tight space of the cabin as if they had rehearsed that dance thousands of times. Through the wet windows, they could see the lights of the shore and the helicopter that still flew over the area. "Where are we going?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Door County," Ethan replied, both aloud and in her mind. "There's a private marina there, run by someone who owes me favors. We can hide until—" He stopped abruptly, a wave of pain crossing his body. Ellie felt it too, an intense burning that seemed to come from inside her bones. "The compound," she gasped, leaning against the cabin wall. "It's changing." Ethan let go of the helm, staggering to her. When their bodies touched, the pain diminished, replaced by a different sensation, like liquid electricity running through their veins. "It's as if—" he began. "As if we were merging," she completed, burying her face in his chest. "Not just our minds, but everything." They stayed like that for a moment, embraced in the dark cabin while the storm raged outside. Ellie could feel Ethan's heart beating against hers, their pulses gradually synchronizing until it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. Hannah was wrong, Ethan whispered against her wet hair. "The compound isn't controlling us. It's responding to something that already existed." Ellie raised her face to look at him, her hands sliding up his chest to his face. In the darkness, his eyes seemed to glow with their own light, the same light she knew shone in hers. "Love," she said simply, and then kissed him. It was as if a circuit had closed. The power that had been growing inside them exploded in a wave of pure energy, making the cabin lights flicker and the electronic instruments buzz. But they barely noticed, lost in a connection that transcended the physical. Through the kiss, memories and sensations flowed between them like a wild river. Ellie could feel Ethan's entire life, the loneliness of his golden childhood, the weight of expectations, the emptiness he had always carried without knowing why. Ethan, in turn, experienced Ellie's years in the basement not as a sad story, but as proof of the indomitable strength of her spirit. When they finally separated, breathless, something had fundamentally changed. They were no longer just two beings psychically connected. They were a new form of existence, something that transcended normal definitions of individuality. "What are we now?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. "We are us," Ethan replied, pressing his forehead against hers. "Just us." A distant boom brought them back to reality. Through the cabin window, they saw a new helicopter approaching, larger, more military than the previous one. "They won't give up," Ellie said, straightening up. "Not while we're living proof of the project." Ethan returned to the helm, his movements now perfectly coordinated with those of the boat and the waves. "Then we won't be. We'll disappear, not just physically, but from all records, all memories." "How?" An enigmatic smile appeared on his lips. "The compound didn't just give us telepathy. It gave us other abilities. You can feel it, can't you?" Ellie closed her eyes, letting her mind expand. Yes, she could feel it, a latent power not yet fully understood, but definitely present. The ability to influence minds, alter memories, become invisible to eyes that didn't want to see. Together, she said, placing her hand over his on the helm, we can do anything. The sailboat cut through the waves with supernatural grace, as if the lake itself was conspiring to help them. The storm began to diminish, and on the horizon, the first rays of the rising sun began to tinge the clouds pink and gold. Ellie looked at Ethan, her brother, her love, her other half in every possible sense, and felt an absolute certainty fill her heart. No matter what Hannah had done to them, no matter the secrets and lies that had brought them here, what mattered was that they had found each other, and now that they were together, not even the science that created them could separate them. As the sun rose over the lake, Ellie and Ethan sailed toward their future, a future that, though uncertain, would eternally be theirs. Just theirs. The private marina in Door County was a small paradise hidden among hills covered with forests. 3 days had passed since the escape from the Lake Geneva shore, 3 days of profound transformations, both physical and emotional. Ellie and Ethan had settled in an isolated fisherman's house, courtesy of Ethan's old friend who managed the marina. The connection between them had stabilized into something extraordinary. They no longer needed words to communicate. Thoughts and emotions flowed naturally between their minds like water. The compound in their organisms had found a unique balance, transforming them into something that not even Hannah had predicted. Ellie was on the porch of the house, watching the sun set over the bay, when she felt Ethan approach before even hearing his footsteps. Her entire body reacted to his proximity, as if they were two magnets naturally attracted to each other. "The news has arrived," he said, leaning against the doorframe. In his mind, Ellie could already see the headlines of the newspapers he brought. "Hannah is alive," she stated, turning to face him. "Yes, in FBI custody." Ethan approached, his fingers naturally intertwining with hers. "The scandal is exploding in all media. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, the experiments in the Midwest, everything." Through their connection, Ellie could feel the storm of emotions this provoked in him. Anger, sadness, relief, a bittersweet sensation of justice being done. Richard? Dead. Ethan pulled her closer, their bodies fitting perfectly. Apparently, he tried to destroy evidence in the main laboratory, and there was an explosion. Ellie closed her eyes, letting the images flow between their minds, the chaos on the shore, the shots, Hannah fallen on the sand, the military helicopter. Everything seemed like a distant dream now. "And what about us?" she asked softly. "Officially." "Missing, presumed dead in the fire that destroyed the colonial house." He touched her face gently. "It was easier than we expected. Influencing the right minds, planting the necessary evidence. It was true, their new abilities went far beyond shared telepathy. Together they could do things that defied logic, alter perceptions, manipulate memories, even bend physical reality on a small scale." "So it's over?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Almost." Ethan led her inside the house, where a laptop was open on the table. "There's one more thing we need to do." On the screen there was an open email, a message from Hannah, sent through secure channels that only Ethan knew. "My beloved children," Ellie read aloud, though the words were already echoing in her mind through the connection with Ethan. "If you're reading this, it means my suspicions were correct. The compound evolved in a way that not even I had predicted. You aren't just the success of Project Twins. You're something entirely new." Ethan squeezed her hand as she continued, reading. "I don't ask forgiveness for what I did. Each decision, each moment of pain I caused, was calculated to reach this result. You are the next stage of human evolution, not through the science that created you, but through the love you developed for each other, a love that transcends genetics, morality, and the limitations of what we consider possible." Ellie felt hot tears stream down her face. Through their connection, she could feel Ethan struggling with his own emotions. "What you are now is beyond my comprehension or control. And that's how it should be. But there's something you need to know. The documents you found, the story about being twins. It was all part of the plan. The truth is even more extraordinary. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. Beside her, Ethan tensed. You aren't siblings. You never were. Ellie isn't my biological daughter. She was chosen from an orphanage, selected for having a genetic code exceptionally compatible with Ethan's. The twins story, the forced separation, everything was orchestrated to create the perfect conditions for the compound to work, so that when you finally met, the connection would be so powerful it would transcend any limitation. Ellie released the breath she didn't know she was holding. In her mind, she could feel Ethan's shock and relief mixing with her own. We weren't siblings, she whispered, turning to face him. All this time. She manipulated us until the end, Ethan completed, his voice hoarse with emotion, using our supposed kinship as just another variable in her experiment. But what we feel is real. He pulled her into his arms, their foreheads touching as their minds merged completely. It always was real. The kiss that followed was like an explosion of light and energy, without the weight of guilt or taboo, without the constraints of a forged kinship. They could finally surrender completely to what they felt. Through their connection, memories and sensations flowed freely. Each moment of repressed desire, each touch laden with guilt, now transformed into a celebration of possibilities. When they separated, breathless, the sun had completely disappeared, plunging the bay into a blanket of stars. What do we do now? Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer through their link. We disappear, Ethan replied, his fingers tracing soft patterns on her back. We start a new life, far from all this. We use what we've become to make a difference in a world, but on our terms, not Hannah's. Ellie smiled, feeling the truth of his words resonate in both minds. Together, always. He kissed her again, softly. Not because an experiment made us this way, but because we chose each other. Because we found each other through all the lies and manipulations. In the bay, the lights of the boats reflected on the water like fallen stars. Ellie nestled in Ethan's arms, their minds and hearts beating in perfect synchrony. The love they felt for each other wasn't a laboratory creation. It was something older than science, deeper than DNA. It was the kind of love that moves mountains, that defies logic, that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary beings. And as night advanced over Door County, Ellie and Ethan began to write their own story, no longer as experiments or fugitives, no longer trapped in forged identities or manipulated destinies. Just as a man and a woman who, against all odds, had found in each other the kind of love that transcends reality itself. A love that, even having begun amid lies and scientific experiments, had transformed into something so pure and true that not even its creator could have predicted or controlled. A love that finally was entirely theirs. Dawn found Ellie and Ethan on the deserted beach in front of the fisherman's house. The sand was still damp from the dew, and the calm lake reflected the sky in shades of pink and gold. They had spent the entire night talking, both in words and in thoughts, processing all the revelations and planning their next steps. I still can't believe it, Ellie said, her bare feet playing with the warm water that reached the shore. All these years thinking I was alone in the world, and Hannah had all the documents about my true origin. Ethan, sitting on the sand beside her, took her hand. Through their connection, Ellie could feel the complexity of his emotions, anger at Hannah, relief that they weren't siblings, and a love so deep it made her heart ache. She planned every detail, he said, pulling her to sit between his legs, her back resting against his chest. The specific choice of you, the separation, even the exact moment we would meet. Like a perfectly controlled experiment, Ellie completed, letting her head fall back on his shoulder. But she didn't count on one variable. Which one? That true love can't be manufactured in a laboratory. She turned to face him, her hands finding his face. What we feel for each other is greater than any experiment. Ethan smiled, that rare and true smile she loved so much. In their shared mind, memories of the previous night flowed like a river of light. The moment when, free of any guilt or restriction, they finally gave themselves completely to each other. Their first true love had been a transcendental experience, their minds and bodies united in a dance that defied reality itself. "You know what's funny?" he said, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair. "Even when we thought we were siblings, even feeling all that guilt and conflict, I knew I could. Never stay away from you." As if we were two parts of the same soul, Ellie completed, feeling the words echo in both minds, not because of DNA or the compound, but because of something deeper. "Destiny, perhaps?" Ethan suggested, a touch of irony in his voice. Ellie laughed softly. The great Ethan Blackwood talking about destiny. The compound must be affecting your brain. He silenced her with a kiss, deep, passionate, loaded with promises. Through their connection, Ellie could feel every nuance of his love, every dream and hope for the future that now opened before them. When they separated, the sun had fully risen on the horizon, bathing the beach in golden light. "We need to decide where to go," Ethan said, though Ellie already knew his thoughts. "We can't stay here forever." "Europe?" she suggested, seeing the images form in his mind. Small Italian villages, Parisian cafes, isolated Greek beaches. "First, we need to resolve one last thing." He took an envelope from his pocket, another email from Hannah, received during the night. Ellie didn't need to read it. The words already flowed between their connected minds. Hannah was offering a deal. In exchange for regular blood samples from both of them, to continue her research in prison, she would ensure that no one would ever look for them. "She doesn't give up," Ellie sighed, feeling Ethan's frustration mix with hers. "No," he agreed, tearing the envelope into small pieces that the wind carried away. "But we don't owe her anything. What we've become is ours. Just ours." Ellie stood up, extending her hand to help him. Together they walked to the water's edge, letting the small waves lap at their feet. "Wherever you want to go," she said softly, "I'll go." Ethan pulled her into his arms, their bodies fitting perfectly. "How about we start with Greece? There's a small island I know, far from everything and everyone. We can stay there while we decide our next step." Through their connection, Ellie saw the place. A seaside village, white houses against the intense blue of the Mediterranean, narrow cobblestone streets, the smell of jasmine in the air. "Perfect," she whispered against his lips. The kiss that followed was like a promise sealed not just with lips and bodies, but with souls that had found a unique way to connect. The power of the compound still ran in their veins, but now it was just one part of what made them special. The true miracle was the love they had built, a love that had survived lies, overcome seemingly impossible barriers, and emerged stronger on the other side. As the sun rose in the sky over Door County, Ellie and Ethan began to plan their new life. No longer as experiments or fugitives, no longer trapped in forged identities or manipulated destinies. Just as a man and a woman who, against all odds, had found in each other the kind of love that transcends reality itself. A love that, even having begun amid lies and scientific experiments, had transformed into something so pure and true that not even its creator could have predicted or controlled. A love that finally was entirely theirs to define, shape, and live in the way they chose. And as the world went on its course, headlines about the Blackwood pharmaceutical scandal occupying newspapers, Hannah facing her crimes in a courtroom, old truths giving way to new realities, Ellie and Ethan embarked on their own journey, a journey that had begun in a dark basement in Chicago and would now take them to the most beautiful places in the world. A journey no longer dictated by experiments or expectations, but by the most powerful catalyst of all, true love in its purest and most transformative form.